My name is Paul Coffey. Now I'm the production director of a company called Coast Digital. We're a digital marketing agency. We're based in Stanway. And the bit of the business that I work in and Michael works in as well is that we deliver assets, websites, landing pages, whatever they might be. And quite a large part of what we do, Michael is going to talk about today. It's called UX design. Now, if being the production director of Coast isn't enough to put my blood pressure absolutely through the roof, and it is, on a semi-regular basis, it is. I'm also volunteered on a board that the County Council run called the Employment and Skills Board. And for that, I am the sector lead for IT, digital, and creative. Now, the talk that we're doing today is the first of a series that we're hoping to do over the course of the next 6 months. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to lift the lid on industry, on some hot topic disciplines and some hot topic activities that we run, and try to show our colleagues in education exactly what we do on a day-to-day basis. It might demystify it for you. You might say, actually, look, we already do this. It's just got some new buzz terms around it, all of which is absolutely fine. But what I'm really keen to do is to put in front of you some people that I know do this stuff on a day-to-day basis. So the chap you're going to hear from today, Michael. Michael, this is not a book that Michael's read and he's now regurgitating it. This is stuff that Michael does on a day-to-day basis. Together, we have sold cider, we have sold real estate, we have sold pet food, we have sold airport
parking, very specifically.
Very, very specifically airport parking. And second-hand cars. We have also sold second-hand cars.
And new cars too. And all sorts of cars.
Thank you very much. All sorts of cars. So the stuff that you're about to see, the techniques that Michael is about to show you, are things that we are paid to do. He is paid to do this stuff in front of clients who are very tough and can be very difficult and can be very demanding. Yeah, and Michael satisfies with the stuff you're about to see today. So I don't know for each of you what you will take away. I don't know what you will do with it, but I really hope that when you do leave, you will have a far better understanding of UX design than you may have done when you stepped in the room. Now, if you enjoy the session today, and the other thing to say as well is it's lovely to see, so we've got 18 people in the room, yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. So when Michael takes time out of his day to prepare a presentation like this, there's nothing more disheartening than sitting in front of 4 people and it's all a little bit of a damn squib. It's lovely that people participate, and what I'd ask is that if you do enjoy today, please go and tell some colleagues. So the next time we run this thing, the next time it might be who can tell digital marketing, who can tell what the next topic might be. We've got a few that we're looking at. It would be lovely to see twice as many people in the room able to take, and again, the important thing is specifically what industry does. Some of the techniques we're using for you to take back to your institutions and your places of work.
So look, I'm here today to talk about UX design, what it means to me, what it means to other people, try and demystify some of the terms around it, and hopefully give you a flavour of how it fits in to the design process as part of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis at a local digital agency. So, as Paul mentioned, my name is Michael Dravnieks. My job title is I am a UX consultant. I've worked at previous agencies as a visual designer and as a web developer. Both of those things have kind of led me to this role today, but that's my main kind of focus now is UX design, and I'm a consultant. So I've worked with some of these brands in the past, some recognizable names on there, but we also I have worked with some smaller brands with big ideas. So UX design can happen at any kind of scale, large and small. And Paul mentioned Coast Digital, where he is the production director, and I am the UX consultant. So we're based in Colchester. We're a team of 40. I think we might have just been, I think we're maybe 41 now. But we've been going 15 years. And we specialise in online marketing, but the other arms of the business are obviously user experience design, and we do website design and build. So we kind of do the whole package. We do the research that leads to the design and build of websites and digital products, and then we are able to market them as well. So we kind of do everything. Right, so I'm going to cover kind of this talk is going to be split into kind of 3 sections today. First of all, I'm going to talk about UX design, and kind of define what it means to me. It's a term that gets used a lot and not always correctly, can be a bit of a buzzword sometimes. So I'll try and bring some clarity to it, explain what it means to me, what it means to other people. And then I'm going to talk about what UX designers do. So how do we get to the bottom of these problems? How do we solve them? And then how people can actually get started if there's something that sounds interesting to them, how they can actually get into this, because a lot of people think that, wow, that sounds really interesting, that sounds great, I want to do this, how do I get started? And it's not always particularly clear how to get into something like UX design. So I'll break that down too. UX design. UX stands for user experience. And if you Google UX design and you go to the image section, you see things like this. And this one as well. So things like this make UX design feel very inaccessible, confusing, overly complex. I mean, this doesn't really mean that much to me, and I work in UX every day. What I want to do is, rather than trying to break down what UX really means, let's just start with the design part of UX design. So a lot of people think that design is about fonts, colors, graphics, illustrations, and that designers look like this, they have colorful hair, and they create things like this. Really beautiful looking pages with nice graphics, colors, all looks really attractive. And that kind of is what design is, but it's only one layer, it's the visual layer, and there's so much more depth to it than that. There's a famous quote from Steve Jobs, and he said, design is not what it looks like, design is how it works. And that's exactly right, and that's how I feel about UX design as well. And really, design is not about visuals as much as it is problem solving. Every day when we work with clients and users, what we're really trying to do is understand their problems and how to really solve them. And that's what design really is. And with that in mind, kind of anyone can be a designer. So if you think back to those diagrams I showed you, it makes it feel really inaccessible and complex. But really, if you've solved a problem in the past, then you've designed something. It's not always about fonts and colors. So I'm going to go straight into a video. So some of the best designers in the world are quite often German, and this particular designer is incredibly German. So I'm going to play a little video and then talk about some of the points.
The truth, there was no design scene in America. Everybody was a corporate suck it up. And I just felt the world is full of idiots when it comes to design. And decided to make my own company. People say, yeah, Frog is expensive. I said, I take that as a compliment. Frog is effing good. I mean, you can say that font for its function has been abused as an excuse for shitty design. And that's a boring, inhuman architecture. Products are not for themselves, products are for us. And that must be understood, that it's not about aesthetics and being cool or whatever. It's about real life, improving real life. People want to be convinced by emotion, not by emotion. Renderings has nothing. I mean, there's no proportion, there's no feeling of touch. There's no feeling in space. When you prototype something and simulate, you get much better decisions for the next step. And if you don't have that, you go through and you just wait what's coming out. I did models, enough to make models. And I think that's one of the methods people don't understand. Okay, it's naughty, you get dirty, but it's the best way to do it. There are many good ideas out there, but there's a radical idea, you know? Does it have to be, I gotta be on display? Today's designers always make those boring boxes that don't understand symbols anymore. If it's accepted quick, it's not good. Steve Jobs was scared like hell when he first saw these little products. But that's very small, but it's good. Are you sure? I said, yes, I am sure. I think you always should do more than people ask for. Or we shouldn't only look at what they ask for, but what they would like to do, they would have the courage to ask for. The question is, how can designers change the world? Design cannot. Designers can change the world.
There he is. One of the things I want to pick up from his short talk was this quote here, where he says, products are not for themselves, products are for us. It's not about aesthetics, being cool or whatever, it's about real life, improving real life. I think that at the core of design, this last part is absolutely key. It's about problem solving and affecting and improving real life. So I've got another quick video to show you. This isn't all going to just be videos. So this is a video that Microsoft put out, I think it's about 3 or 4 years old now. And this is their vision of the future and how they see products working with the real world. So I'll just play this quickly and then we'll talk through it.
Welcome to Johannesburg International Airport. Please approach the road to create your pickup zone.
Microsoft's kind of vision of the future. Feels like a lot of the same stuff that we were doing, maybe with paper or just with your phone, but everything just seemed to be on a piece of glass, or on a wall, or a touchscreen fridge, opposed to how we do it today. So I think that's a really good example of like where something hasn't really, a problem hasn't really been solved. It's not really a great example of design. It's just doing the same things just on a thin piece of glass or on a touch screen. It's not really solving any problems that haven't already been solved. And the other thing that strikes me about that video is that there's no constraints. So when we problem solve and through design in the real world, we have to work within constraints. In that futuristic world there, everything worked seamlessly. But what would happen if the Wi-Fi was down? Or in the real world, we have Apple and Google and Microsoft, and their services don't always talk to each other and work together. So, imagine if the car is pulling up to the hotel and the taxi is working on one platform and the hotel system is on another. Can they talk to each other? In that idealistic world, yes, but within the real world, we're going to have the constraints of platforms and things like that. And when I work in UX design every day, I have to work with some of these constraints. So time is a big constraint. Budget is another one. I mentioned technology and platforms and things like that. These are other constraints that come into problem solving and design every day. We also have to work with brand guidelines, so we can't just design things as we see them. We have to work within the constraints of agreed brand guidelines, colors, fonts, that kind of thing. Laws and regulations is another big one. So Tesla are an electric car manufacturer who are making some really great waves in that industry, but they have to come up against laws and regulations within different global markets all the time. So problem solving within constraints is a huge part of what design really is in the real world. So we've kind of spoken about what design is and isn't. So let's focus on what user experience design is. So to me, user experience design is an education process that starts at the very beginning of a digital project before a single graphic has been drawn or a line of code has been written. And it helps you make educated decisions along the way to launch and shows you where you should be going in the future. And it focuses on user-centered design principles. So user-centered design is where we make decisions based all around the user. So go through phases of research, design, adaptation, measure, and planning, all with the user at the heart of the focus. And we go through iterative cycles of these stages, but all with testing and the user at the center of it. And making a website or a digital product is really expensive, so you have to test as you go through each stage to make sure that you're on the right track. Because even if you're just a few degrees off and you head off in the wrong direction, when you get to the end, you're going to be way off. So it's about minimizing the risk. So when you design with users at the heart of your process, when you get to the end, you know there's going to be something that they can use. And you might recognize some of these logos. So these are companies that successfully employ user-centered design principles into all of their products. So the other thing about user experience is it has to convert. And it's kind of this sweet spot where user needs and business needs overlap. Because really importantly, there is no point in having a product that people love if it doesn't help a business to achieve its goals. Because like I said, websites and digital products can be really expensive to make, so if they don't convert, there's no point in them existing. And we can probably all think of some examples of apps or websites that people have really enjoyed using. They've disappeared over the years because they haven't had a solid business model, or they've been really great to use, but they haven't actually generated any money, and they've just kind of disappeared. So what do UX designers actually do? Well, in short, they define the right approach to a digital product and its creation. So I want to introduce you to these guys. These guys have got together for a meeting, and they're going to plan out their new website. They're all really excited. They've seen their competitors launch some new sites over the years, and their site has been lagging behind, and they're excited to get their new product up and running. They've all had ideas building up in their minds about what the website should look like and it should be. And now they get the chance to put their ideas in front of each other and start planning this thing out. They get together and the meeting starts and they make some decisions based on some of these factors. So competitor change. Their competitors launch new sites or products and they need one too. They may make decisions about their website based on their own opinions, what they think, the way that they see it working. They may make some decisions based on panic or fear. The market has changed and they need to keep up. They may make decisions based on just sort of knee-jerk reactions or cherished notions, the way that they've always done things, the way that things just are in their industry. And they may make some decisions based around ego, so the MD or the boss may be in the room and he has the loudest voice and he gets the last say. So the way that he sees the website working is the way that they're going to end up doing it. Unfortunately for these guys, they are destined to fail because all of these things essentially amount to guesswork. This is absolutely not the way to plan a website at all. And we meet clients like this all the time, really lovely people with great businesses who just make decisions based on the wrong factors. And that's fine, but by the time they reach us, we can introduce them to the right kind of process. So if those guys were here, they might say to me, well, no, look, Michael, you're wrong. We know exactly what we're doing because we've looked at our analytics. So the statistics that run beneath the website that show you kind of what people are doing, what pages they're visiting, how long they're spending on a site, which kind of device they're visiting on. Analytics can show you all of that kind of data, and a lot of people make decisions based on that data, and that's fine, but it only really tells you half of the story. It tells you the what, it tells you what's happening, but with that what, you kind of need to add the why. So analytics tell you what's happening, and user research will tell you why that stuff is happening. And speaking to users is absolutely essential, because if you just look at analytics, you're only really seeing half of the story. And users are kind of the key to knowing your website. Your users know your website better than anybody else because they use it. They may use it every day. They may be using it as part of their job, and they may just be your biggest customer. So as part of a UX process, we have to get to know the users, find out what they think, what they feel, and what they need. But remember, UX is not just about what users want, it has to convert. So it's about business needs too. So we have to get to know the stakeholders within the business as well. So their needs and their goals for their business. It's that overlap of user needs and business needs. And essentially, UX designers do the hard work to make it simple. So if the people building the site don't put in the hard work to make things really simple, then that hard work will need to be done by somebody. And if you don't do it, or if we don't do it before the site is launched, then the users will end up doing the hard work to achieve what they need out of it. So let's talk about some of the techniques that we use to deliver the kind of insight that we need. Before I talk about those, I wanted to put this quote out there, because this is really kind of sums up the research process. So the design process is weird and complicated because people are weird and complicated. And they really are. So when we interview people or we observe how they're using websites, the way that we expect them to use a site or what we think they'll do is never really plays out that way. People will find their own little hacks and methods of using sites and products all the time. And so this kind of quote always sticks in my mind when we begin a research process. So we always start with research. And some of the methods that we employ on the screen here, so we consistently speak to people over the phone and send out surveys. So surveys are great because they allow you to sort of gather quite a lot of quantitative information really quickly. So if a company has a mailing list or sort of a big database of customers and their details, we can sort of send out surveys. I'm sure you've all received surveys in your inbox before. They might be a bit annoying, but for researchers or UX designers, it's really useful for us to gather those opinions in, and we can take what we learn from them and help they kind of help us to improve the products. And we'll often recruit people to speak to over the phone off the back of a survey. So again, the what and the why, the analytics to the user research, we can take quite a lot of the quantitative data and then speak to people about what the data has shown us. It's shown us that this is happening. We need to find out why that's happening, so we can kind of add the qualitative data to the quantitative data by speaking to people over the phone and kind of asking them why they answered the survey in a particular way. Another thing we often do is speak to customer support teams. So if you think about customer support teams within a business, their job is to speak to users on the phone like all day, every day. So they hear a lot of complaints, feedback, opinions. So kind of sitting down with them for an hour or two is really, really useful for us, because we can kind of learn everything that they know. We'll try and just get all of their knowledge, because they're essentially doing user research in a way kind of as their job every day. So they're always really, really good to speak to. Other things we can do, mentioned analytics is kind of like that run on almost every website nowadays. But we can run user testing labs as well. So this is where we sit somebody in front of a laptop, ask them to complete some tasks on a website, and we can observe them, watch how they use the site, and kind of make improvements based on the problems that we see them running into or the way that they're interacting with the site. So I've got an example of this, kind of a user testing session that we recorded. So this is at the start of a project. What we wanted to do was to review a few of the competitors' websites. And what we did is we asked users to complete a few tasks on the site, and we kind of filmed them using some software that kind of shows, films their facial reactions. We can record what they're saying and obviously see their mouse moving around the screen. So I'll show you this example. This is at the start of a project where we asked a girl to kind of use a competitor's site and see the kind of problems that she may be running into.
I am the office manager for a web company web agency in Essex, and I have a London office, but it's not that good. So I'm going to look for somewhere else that maybe we could have a base in London. So I'm going to look at this size, whatever my team size, location, budget. I can search. Okay, they've got a lot of properties. That's good. Excellent. So that would be probably the right one first. Oh, I like the colours. That's nice.
It all starts off really well.
Find an office, easily search and compare. Compare would be fantastic. Yes, book viewings directly through, moving. That's great. Okay, let's have a look. So, no, I'll get rid of that. And I don't want to give you. No, I don't want to give you the details. I don't want to give you my details. I just wanted to search. Go away. Try something else. Okay, let me look at offices for you. Okay, so fixed desk, hot desk, private office, nice images. That's quite nice, isn't it? No, I don't want to log in. I just want to have a look.
So she's just trying to look at some offices. She keeps encountering these pop-ups,
that's nice.
asking for her details.
Some more images of this book. That's cool. Ooh, okay. Has scroll bars but doesn't scroll. And I can't see this image. Yeah. Show me some more of the inside of the building. It's nice. Lovely, really nice big images. I like that a lot. Okay, no. No, go away. It's great, I like this. So, 1 to 100 hot desk, private office. The 6 people, that's cool. Okay, so I can book viewing on canals, I can go back to the search. Okay, so no, go away. How do I get rid of this box? I don't want to link an account, I just want to search. Oh, so annoying. Let's go back here. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. That is absolutely infuriating. Why can't I just look at some of the properties and get an idea of what I want? Why do I have to give you my details now? Okay, that menu doesn't work.
She's got so angry she managed to break the website.
That's not doing anything. It's annoying. So basically these are the only ones I can see unless I give you my details now, which I don't want to do because I just want to see some images. I don't need to spam me or get in contact with me yet. I'm not ready for that yet. I click. Okay, that's just really annoying. To the point where I'm getting fed up and I don't want to use this anymore. It's a really nice site, but if I can't see details of offices without giving you my details, then I don't want to do that. I don't want to give you those details yet. Can I just get in touch? Summer, press, FAQs, read the team, how it works. So I could get in touch with you here, but I'm not ready to do that yet. I'm not even ready there. Fine, I think I'll just do that when I'm ready to.
Okay, so not great feedback. But that's a really good example of how we can test the website. We can see the users' kind of interactions with the site, what they think, what they feel, the problems that they're encountering, and we can take those learnings from several sessions like that, whether it's on a competitor's website at the start of a project or on, say, the client's existing site. So we can kind of find out what they, in a brief, they may tell us what they think is wrong with the site. We can actually run testing sessions like that and find out what's really wrong with the site and then kind of proceed from there. Once we've made some design changes or kind of come up with some new solutions, we can use software like that to test our own kind of prototypes and get feedback. So it comes back to this user-centered design process where we kind of iterate and test as we go through, so we always know we're on the right track. We may kind of do a testing session like that, get some feedback, make some changes, and then that may present a whole new set of problems. So we have to keep testing, keep iterating and changing until we get to kind of the end. Another thing that we can use as part of the research process is a tool that kind of shows us some heat mapping. So this is where we have a small bit of code that runs on a site that shows us where people are clicking on a page. So this is Coast Digital's homepage here. And we can see these kind of hotspots where people are clicking the most. So you do typically see that people are just kind of clicking on their navigation, they're trying to move around. But the other thing that we can see is kind of this prime real estate at the homepage, the top banner, is receiving almost no interaction. So maybe this section needs to work harder. Or if we were trying to get more people to kind of click over this side and these links weren't as important, we could see that feedback. Rather than just kind of guesswork, we can see real interaction with the site and make changes based on that. So it's all about evidence-based design. And the other thing that we can do is quite often when we kind of gather all this research through the tools and the processes that I've mentioned, we'll present this back to clients in a workshop kind of scenario. So as I mentioned before, UX is this kind of the overlap between user needs and business requirements. So what we'll do is we'll present the research back to the stakeholders within the business and then kind of work with them to kind of iterate on some of the problems that we've identified and kind of solve them together. It's not about pushing the work onto them, but as the stakeholders and the people that know the business the most, presenting the research to them and then kind of beginning to solve some of the challenges that we agree together is a really good way to kind of proceed as we go through to the kind of the next stage of the project. The stage after we kind of have this really nice base of research is often visualization. So this is where we create some of the kind of really nice assets that people usually associate with UX design. So things like wireframes, customer journey maps, personas. So a persona is where when we do kind of the base of research, what we'll do is identify kind of patterns of behavior from different types of users, and we'll set those out into what we call personas. So these are internal champions where we kind of group patterns of behavior together. We give them a face and a name, and we use those throughout the project. I'll show you one in a minute. We'll also create kind of responsive prototypes that we can test using the same kind of software that I showed you a minute ago. We'll do things like create sitemaps, which is where we'll kind of map out all the pages that we think we're going to need on the new site. And we'll identify the requirements. So the things that a website or a digital product has to do. And this is all based on the user research and the feedback that we've had from the stakeholders within a business. So this is an example of a wireframe. So this is where we will kind of map out a really low fidelity version of a page. Just kind of showing the things that need to go on a page, in which kind of order and where. So it's like it's kind of a skeleton version of a page that we can add a visual layer to later on. And again, we can use this for testing. So this is an example of a persona. So this guy, I think this comes from a project that we did for a alcohol brand, and we'd identified that there was a pattern of behavior that was typical to wine buyers, and that was different from kind of like people that bought beer and gifts and spirits from that brand. And so we kind of give him a face and a name, and then map out kind of the things that he's trying to do on the site and why, and the things that we must do on the site for him, and the things we must avoid for him. So when we're working on a project, we will print these out, kind of stick them on the wall, and remind ourselves of who we're designing for at all times. And user-centered design, remember, we're always designing with the user in mind. So having these kind of personas is really useful. And when we make a design decision, we'll kind of ask ourselves, what would this guy think of that change? Or if we change this page, how will that affect that user? So it always keeps us on the right track and make sure that we're designing with the users in mind. This is an example of a customer journey map. So from the research, we'll see how people are using a site, and we kind of map that out. So it's really good to kind of visualize, but show the kind of journeys that people are taking at the moment from kind of one page to another, where they're going, and then we'll redesign that journey and kind of change the order of pages or the flow as we would want people to progress through the site and to ultimately convert. Remember, good UX leads to conversions. And then the last kind of thing that UX designers are always doing is testing. So again, keep going back to this user-centered design philosophy. This is where we test at every stage. So I showed you one example of kind of user testing earlier on with the girl who was testing the property website. There's several ways that we can kind of test. So we can set up labs where we get people into a room, much like this, and put them in front of a laptop and ask them to kind of perform some tasks, record them. We can also do it in a remote setting, so we can kind of put together a prototype or a website online, and there's some tools that we can use to send that link out to people, and on their computer they'll receive an email and a task, and they kind of have their own equipment where they can record that and send it back to us. So a really good way of us getting feedback from a user and to be able to test when we don't have direct access to them. So this is really useful in a scenario where we're dealing with a global website, for example, that operates in different markets. So it allows us to kind of reach out to those people and to test that way. Sometimes we just have to go to where the users are. So we can go to events or to just a coffee shop where we can find users and to kind of just put a laptop in front of them or an iPad or a phone and just ask them to quickly do a 5-minute test on a site. And it's a really good way to get quick feedback with a large number of people just by going to where they are. We can also run kind of usability tests with people so that we ask them to kind of perform a task, and we have a checklist of actions that we need to make sure that we're performing. So it's all about kind of getting feedback and making sure that we're designing with the users in mind and that the website is performing the kind of tasks that we set out at the start. So what are the results of a good user experience process? Well, first of all, there's return on investment. So this is key for businesses, right? So they need conversions and they need to see a return on investment. For me, the biggest thing is happy customers. So it's great that we make businesses money from their website and conversions. That's great. However, for me, changing someone's life or changing their experience through a digital product is what drives me to kind of do this every day. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. She said, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." I love that. I think that's really important. That's what kind of motivates me to kind of design every day. I think it's worth going back to this idea of design being problem solving. And with that in mind, anyone can be a designer. One of the things that a lot of designers kind of encounter is this thing called impostor syndrome. Impostor syndrome is best described as the feeling that you're a fraud. Even if you've been recognized for being amazing at what you do, impostor syndrome sufferers constantly worry that they're one mistake away from being found out. So a lot of people think, I'm not a real designer because I didn't go to university and study design, or I never went to art college or school, and I can't draw, and I can't make really pretty graphics. But that holds so many people back when it really shouldn't. Just coming back to this idea that design is problem solving and not about pretty graphics. I went on Google and tried to find some examples of quite like high profile or famous people who suffer from imposter syndrome. I found Emma Watson. So quite well known, like maybe not the best actress ever, but I thought it was really interesting that she suffers from this and she's really open about it as well. So she said, it's almost like the better I do, the more my feeling of inadequacy actually increases, because I'm just going, at any moment someone's going to find out I'm a total fraud and I don't deserve any of what I've achieved. Which is it's a real shame, but I've seen so many designers suffer from this because they can't draw or they don't have, this really good eye for fonts or graphics. And it holds so many people back when it shouldn't. So my advice to people who want to get into design or UX design is always just kind of like these basic things. So take notice of the everyday things around you and turn on your design radar. So I've got a really good example here. This is a ticket machine. So how many people have ever struggled to use a ticket machine before? Almost all of us, I'm sure. So this is quite a typical design for a bad ticket machine. I mean, it's so bad that they actually built a telephone, like a help telephone into the system. Like they knew people were gonna struggle with it. And look at this, it's got like instructions, but like where do you even start? It's something like this is a really good way to start kind of turning your design radar on. So think about how difficult it was to use and how it might have been simplified, or how if you were to redesign this, how would you make it more simple, or how would you improve it? So learn from bad design. And the other thing that I would always say to people who want to get into user experience or design is to read. So these are some examples of books that a lot of young designers kind of start with when they want to get into user experience. This one in particular is really, really interesting. It's about the psychology of persuasion, so how you can actually influence people through design. Remember, good design converts, so how can you push people to kind of perform the actions that you want them to perform on your website? So I highly recommend that last book. And user experience is kind of like we don't just work on our own, we work as part of a wider team. And there's quite a few different arms to user experience. So for people who are quite creative and they are good at art and they can draw, then visual design is kind of a really good part of user experience. So I've kind of like made out that design is just problem solving, but obviously we do need pretty graphics on top of that kind of that good research layer. For people who are really well organized, information architecture is an arm of UX that people can go into. So that's where you kind of sort out the order of things, the layer of things, and the hierarchy of information that you're presenting to people, the navigation, the structure of pages. There's a lot of thought that goes into that side of things. So for people who are really well organized, information architecture could be a good career path for them. For people who are interested in psychology, working with people, talking to people, then the research side of things could be a really good way for them to get into user experience design. And for people who are really good with numbers, data, very statistical, then the data analysis side of things could be a really good career path for them. And I just want to go back to the video with Herman Esmler, who said, designers can change the world. The question is not how design can change the world, it cannot. It's designers who can change the world. So, thank you. Any questions? Yeah, so guerrilla testing was where you go to where the users are. If you can't access them online, or you don't have the ability to set up a lab and invite people in, you can just go to an event. So for example, if you're working with a client who is exhibiting somewhere, you could go to like a trade show, something like that, and essentially just go out on the road with a laptop and kind of get in front of users instead of trying to invite them into you, go to where they are. There's quite a few different ways to do it, but typically, a wireframe essentially would be a page without any kind of graphical elements to it. It's just the structure of a page, showing the content in the order that it's going to be displayed, and kind of the functionality and the kind of the navigation that goes around that. So I have a degree. But I think it's very much like we look for people who think a certain way, are motivated to kind of learn more every day, have the right kind of attitude and kind of open mind that is required for the role, and not necessarily just kind of a particular qualification. It's about what people can do and the way that they think is what's key to us. So we have people in for work experience. We've taken on some apprentices who have been really successful with us. So yeah. If you can show them the evidence, that usually is sufficient. So if they are saying a website needs to do this kind of thing or be this way, and then you can show them, like the video that I showed you guys earlier on, an example of that not working, or an example of another solution working much better, usually seeing that will change their mind. Or if they're sort of proposing a solution or saying we need to do things this way, and we show them the numbers where actually that's not converting or that's not working, but our suggestion based on the research is this, and the numbers back that up, or the testing that we've done backs that up, then usually there's not really much kind of persuasion beyond that needs to happen. Just having the evidence is usually quite eye-opening for them in many cases. We try to forge really good relationships with our clients, obviously, but I think usually if the fact that they're working with us and they have bought into our process that involves user experience, usually means that they are fairly open to it anyway. The example that I gave where people are making decisions based on knee-jerk reactions, cherished notions, etc. Those guys have usually been through a couple of bad website redesigns in the past, and so at that point they are open to something new or the right kind of approach, which I think it takes a few bad projects to kind of they'll discover that, okay, yeah, actually we need to design this around the user needs and not what we need. So by the time they've come to us, they're fairly open to it anyway, so we don't always have to persuade them that much. So we don't just kind of do a load of research, keep it to ourselves, and then design, you know, a solution based on that research and present it to them at the end and go, this is the right design because, you know, we've done the research, we've seen it, here's our solution. You know, we work really closely with them, forge a great relationship with them. So we take them on the journey with us and kind of share the results of the testing and the research, so that we're always on the same page with them. And that's always, we've always had a great success with that. You know, I showed you the persona. So quite often we will segment our users into kind of personas, because those personas, or those segments of users have different behaviors and different needs, and we would often design different parts of the sites or journeys for them. We would test with those segments in mind. So typically we test 5 to 8 users that fit into that kind of persona or that role, and we usually find that there are between 3 to 5 personas per project. So if you work that out, it's usually around 20 to 25 tests in total, but it's completely dependent on number of personas. But typically, I think it's fairly well established in our industry that 5 tests per user group is sufficient. At that point, you do identify most of the problems, and anything after that, you know, you're starting to see a lot of repetition, and the amount of return that you get per test kind of starts dropping off. So wireframing. So a lot of people think about UX and they just think it's wireframing. You know, instead of just starting with Photoshop and designing something really colorful and visual and nice, I think, oh, if I actually just sketch that out into a wireframe first, then that's kind of UX, and you know, we're following the right process, and that's typically not it. I think hopefully if you've learned one thing from today, that it's that a UX process is designed based on a foundation of research through user testing and interviewing users, so that you know when you get to the end of a process that you're designing the right thing. But wireframes are quite a nice hands-on way to think about design without, again, having to worry about colors, fonts, etc. So what I'm going to do is kind of do a quick few slides about the best practice for wireframing. So there's no one way to design a website. There's no one way to kind of design the perfect wireframe. Everyone has their own techniques. So a wireframe is essentially a really, really good way to communicate our research and ideas. So once we've got this body of research, we've presented it to our client, we need to start turning that into a tangible design. And a wireframe is a really good way to start doing that. It's also a really good way to establish an information hierarchy. So that may sound like quite a complex term. What it essentially means is start putting things in the right place, establishing an order and a flow to a website or a page at this early stage. A wireframe also brings to light the kind of features that need to be included on a site. If it needs to have a sign-up box or a search or a particular piece of functionality that's essential to a user journey, then when we start wireframing that, we kind of bring that to life, and it can really start becoming a part of a page or a user journey. I mentioned user journeys. So a user journey consists of a set of pages. So if we're wireframing pages, we're kind of creating a user journey as we map those pages out, and we can see how a user may flow from one page to another. But the most important reason that we would wireframe is because they're really fast and easy to create and really quick and easy to change. One of the things that we tell clients all the time is you don't start with visuals and you don't start designing a website just in Photoshop, because when you want to change things based on user research, feedback, testing, when you're dealing with colors, fonts and graphics, it's quite time consuming to change those things. And if you've got a really nice cohesive visual design and then suddenly got to put something else in there or change something around, when you're dealing with a level of visual design that has a lot of cohesion and flow to it, when you've got to change those things, it's quite time consuming and therefore expensive. So wireframes are really quick and easy to change, and that means cheap as well. So there's several ways that we can create wireframes. And the most basic is using a pen and paper, right? And they can, like I said at the start, there's no one way to create a wireframe. As long as it kind of communicates your ideas and the hierarchy and the flow of a page, then it can look and feel any way that you like. So here's an example of quite a messy, sketchy, hand-drawn wireframe. Here's an example of a slightly better one with straighter lines and slightly neater writing. They don't have to be hand-drawn, they could be digital. So you can create them using software where you can easily draw sort of boxes and have labels and buttons and things like that in there. And if you want to go really high fidelity, you can kind of create some that look like this. Hopefully you can see that. So this has been created in some kind of design software, and there's nothing wrong with this. So while this may be a little bit more difficult to change, ultimately if you're communicating the research and the kind of the hierarchy of a page, then you're creating a good wireframe. So who should wireframe? And the answer to this is anybody. So again, this is not just a task that designers kind of get. It's not just a task for designers. Within Coast, quite often a lot of the guys in the marketing teams have to create wireframes. They have to come up with a new landing page for an ad campaign, or they may need to just make some quick changes to something that the client has put together. So a wireframe is a really good way to communicate those changes. They don't necessarily have to use any software. They can just kind of draw it out, email that back to the client with their suggestions. So anyone can kind of create a wireframe. It's not just a task for user experience designers. So how do you get started? Well, first of all, you're going to need your research. Remember, everything's based on a foundation of research. You're going to need your requirements based on that research. So here are the things that a website needs to do. Here are the things that it needs to communicate. And you've got to have your own ideas. We'll come on to that. You mentioned tools, right? So here's the names of a few tools out there. So Azure is something that we use at Coast. It's a piece of software that is essentially built for creating wireframes. It's got all the kind of buttons, labels, boxes and things in there that you need to create wireframes quite quickly. Sketch is what I use, which is a bit more of a visual design tool, but again, it's really quick to create wireframes with. Some of these other ones you may have heard of. A lot of people use PowerPoint, because again, you can draw boxes, shapes, that kind of thing. If you already know how to use PowerPoint, then it's really useful. But I always find the best way to start with a wireframe is pen and paper, because you can kind of scribble things out, move things around. There's no digital stuff getting in the way. It's really quick and easy. So I usually start with pen and paper. So I'm not sure that these are free, but if you go onto Google, there are lots of online free ones out there. There's one called, I think it's called Mockingbird. It's a free one that runs in the browser. There's another one called Balsamic with a Q. Yeah, Balsamic, which is, again, I think that's free. There may be a paid version, but I think it's essentially free. You can upgrade to get some other features, I think. So let's talk about some of the best practice for creating a wireframe. So I'm going to go through kind of the basics, introduce you to some techniques that will help you to kind of establish a hierarchy, and then go through some of the concepts, some kind of design concepts for a wireframe. So one of the most important things when you're creating a wireframe is to number, title, and label your templates. So a lot of people make this really basic mistake where they'll create a page, they'll send it to a client, and then they get an email back saying, sorry, what page is this? So just putting a title at the top. And if you're using templates, putting a template number is really basic, but it's really, it can help just kind of solve that problem. So fidelity is another thing that's really key to kind of communicating how confident you are about your design. So some of the tools that I mentioned before have this kind of mode where you can turn up a slider to create sketchy lines or turn it down to create really straight and sharp lines. And the reason for that is that quite often this kind of a wireframe that looks a little bit like this could kind of communicate that you're not that close to the final design, you're not that sure about what you've designed, and perhaps you need to go through some more testing before you get there. Whereas when you get to something that looks more like this, you're kind of communicating that you're more sure about your design. So that's why you see those kinds of features in a tool. The other basic is wireframes are about stating your intention. So wireframe is all about communicating your ideas. So make sure that your wireframes are really clear and require as little explanation as possible. If you have a wireframe, you send it to someone and they ask you a load of questions about what's this and what does this mean and why is that there, then you probably haven't kind of designed it with this in mind. So it should require as little explanation as possible. So make things really clear, make sure that everything is labeled and is laid out really so that it requires very little explanation. So I always say to people that don't use color in wireframes either. Make sure they're black and white, because the last thing you want to be doing is getting feedback from a client where they say, I don't like that font, or can we change that color? So just completely take that out of the equation altogether and just make them black and white. Content is a really key part of wireframing as well. If you have real content, you should try and use it. So if we're thinking about communicating our ideas, communicating research, it's much easier to lay out a page and design a flow if you have the real content. Quite often we don't have real content and we have to kind of work with either making it up, so using indicative content, or as an absolute last resort, some kind of Latin text. So I don't know if some of you may be familiar with lorem ipsum, it's kind of like just filler text. But if you have real content, real photography, real copy, it's always really worth putting that in there because it helps you to design and communicate much easier than if you have to kind of make it up or as a last resort use filler text. So wireframing is all about hierarchy. It's all about introducing a flow of information to a user. So a page should have a really clear structure. So using headings is absolutely key. So if you haven't wireframes before, you've probably used Microsoft Word. I'm sure everyone's used Microsoft Word. In Word, you have the ability to kind of set different heading sizes. So top level heading, second level heading, third level heading. And they're usually quite different sizes and weights of font as well. So using kind of top level headings and kind of introducing a hierarchy of headings is really key. And using things like common elements like bullet lists, numbered lists, paragraphs, again, is really key because it helps you to communicate your ideas if you're using really familiar elements. Don't worry too much about font sizes because they'll come later when a visual designer gets hold of a wireframe, but just make sure that you are consistent. Being consistent is absolutely key. And focus on what is most important. So the order of things on a page really matters. Ultimately, you want to be trying to tell a story as you design a site. If you're taking people on a journey, then the order and the flow of what's on a page is really key. People read a page from top to bottom, kind of left to right. So the order in which you place things is absolutely crucial. So think about what's most important and kind of put that at the top and make sure that as you go down a page, the flow introduces other elements that are less important. One of the key concepts in a page design, thinking about flow and order, is always providing a natural next step. If we're taking people on a journey and they're flowing from page to eventually, hopefully, perform a task that you've designed either to capture some data or an action that you want people to perform, you always have to kind of lead them onto the next step of that journey, and always avoid dead ends. So at the bottom of a page, you never want to just have it kind of stop and there's the footer. You've always got to have kind of like a next step, an action, or a task that you want someone to perform when they get to the end. And it's always key that designed elements look like how they should behave. So again, when you're wireframing, don't leave any doubt. A button should look like a button. It should look clickable. I see so many kind of designs where they just draw like a little square with a label inside, and that's supposed to be a button, but it doesn't have to look nice. So you can kind of add some shading or something to make it look like a physical clickable button. Even if it looks horrible, it's about communicating what the element does, what it is, and how it should behave. Another example is text links should always be underlined. You know, we don't see a lot of that in web design anymore, links being underlined, but when you're wireframing, you're communicating your ideas and trying to show how an element should behave. So kind of something basic like putting under an underline beneath a piece of text clearly communicates that it's a link. Another example, a video play button on top of an image. You know, don't assume that someone can figure out that that's a video. Make it really, really clear. Put a little play button on there. Just an example. And use really, really clear language as well, and natural language. So people sometimes get caught up in trying to use kind of jargon or special words on a site. Just be really clear and use natural language and provide clear instructions. So click here is something that you always want to avoid, because it doesn't really tell you why you should click there or what's going to happen after you've clicked there. So provide clear instructions and just tell people what's going to happen, why they should do something. And think about trigger words as well. So, I mean, the internet's been around for a while now, and I think that words like in a top-level navigation, terms like about us, contact us, services have become established, even if they aren't perhaps the most exciting or interesting, or they may not always be what a business suggests you put in there. But particularly when you're wireframing, just these established kind of trigger words about us, etc., are not who we are, is much better for you to use, because as a user, we're accustomed to seeing like these kind of trigger words appear in a navigation. So just use them. Don't try and overcomplicate things or get too kind of clever about it. If someone is looking for a contact us page, you know, don't put in the primary navigation, get in touch or speak to us. People are looking for contact us, so just use it. So what I wanted to do just before we leave is just a recap on kind of the first part of the presentation. So to say it, go through it again. Design, it's not about pretty pictures, colors, fonts, graphics. It's about problem solving. And UX design is a balance of user needs and business needs. So research that covers both. Testing, measuring, and learning is key to a good user-centered design process. So with these wireframes that you produced today, the next step might be to go and, I mean, you showed them to one another, but maybe to show them to some users. We had some assumptions about how people would interact with different parts of the page. So I thought younger people might be more interested in the trailer, and some of the old people might be interested in some of the more informational side of things. Those assumptions would be really good to test those. And if they were right, excellent, you know you're on the right track. And if they weren't right, then you could adjust your design so that you know that you're on the right way. So look, research is a foundation of a good experience. Know what you're designing, who it's for, and test it so that you know that it's going to work. And the results of a good UX process are return on investment, I think the business side of things, and happy customers is the kind of the user side of things as well. And ultimately, good design can change the world, and anybody can be a designer. So thank you very much.